I'm going to be straight with you about something. The first thing that came to me when I started thinking about this whole idea of retiring in 10 years, I thought it was just a joke. I thought it was the same as those internet flashy promises that sound great at first, but usually fall apart the moment you actually look at the numbers. What I found completely blew my mind, because I didn't know that people really do that. But the gap between wanting it and actually making it happen is bigger than anyone wants to admit. We need to talk about the real deal, which includes all the uncomfortable parts explained in detail, not the polished version you see in motivational posts or the idealized dream offered in clickbait. The promise and the price. Most people hear retire in 10 years and immediately picture freedom, which technically is what retirement means. What they miss is what those 10 years actually look like, what you have to do every day to make the numbers work. Retirement isn't really about age when you break it down. The whole thing comes down to money, specifically accumulating enough that working becomes optional forever. A formula exists for calculating that number, something called the 4% rule that came from a 1994 study by William Bengen. The concept is simple enough. Withdraw 4% of your retirement savings each year with inflation adjustments, and based on historical stock and bond performance, your money should last at least 30 years. Need $40,000 a year to cover living expenses? Multiply that by 25 and you get $1 million. $60,000 a year requires $1.25 million saved and invested. $80,000 means you need $2 million sitting in your accounts. That's your target number. The amount you need accumulated and invested before walking away from your job becomes financially possible. Here's where things shift from interesting to brutal. Saving that much money in a decade means conventional wisdom about saving 10 or 20% of your income doesn't work anymore. You need to bank somewhere between 65 and 75% of everything you earn. Worth saying again because it sounds absurd. Roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of your entire income needs to go into savings every year for 10 straight years. The reality nobody mentions. When those numbers first showed up in my research, I double-checked them thinking something had to be wrong, because saving 65 to 75% of your income means living on just 25 to 35%. For most people, that's not tight budgeting, that's extreme deprivation. Think about where your money actually goes right now. Rent or mortgage probably eats 30 to 40% of your income if you live anywhere near a major city. Then come student loans, car payments, insurance premiums, phone bills, internet service, groceries. That's all before touching the expenses that make life feel worth living. Going out with friends, taking trips, pursuing hobbies, saving for other goals. Making the 10-year plan work requires cutting everything down to 1/4 of your earnings, which means someone pulling in $100,000 a year lives on $25,000 to $35,000. Someone earning $150,000 gets by on roughly $40,000. This is where we need to stop and look at who realistically can pull this off. Research shows that retiring in 10 years with typical middle-class expenses between $40,000 and $60,000 annually requires saving $100,000 to $150,000 every year. Your household income needs to land somewhere between $140,000 and $250,000 depending on how taxes hit you. Context matters here. As of 2022, the median household income in the United States sat at $74,580, meaning half of all households earn less than that. Right from the start, we're talking about something that's only theoretically possible for a narrow slice of the population. Income alone doesn't tell the whole story, though. Debt loads matter, geographical location matters, whether you're raising children matters enormously. Student loan debt averages over $37,000 per borrower across the country. Median home prices in San Francisco, New York, or Boston range between $800,000 and $1.2 million. Childcare expenses run $10,000 to $20,000 per child every year. When someone tells you they retired in a decade, what they're often leaving out is that they started with high earnings, minimal debt, either no children or kids who'd already finished college, and they lived somewhere housing costs didn't eat half their monthly income. The movement behind the madness. A whole community has built itself around this concept. They call it FIRE, which stands for Financial Independence Retire Early, and it really exploded throughout the 2010s via blogs and podcasts where people shared their stories of escaping traditional employment.
The core philosophy breaks down simply: save 50 to 70% of what you earn, invest aggressively in index funds and other vehicles, embrace frugal living, and you can leave the workforce decades before your peers. People like Mr. Money Mustache actually retired in their 30s and have been living off investment returns for years now, proving the concept works under the right conditions. What caught my attention when I explored this world more closely is that most FIRE community members don't actually retire in 10 years. 15 to 20 years is far more typical. A big portion never fully retire at all. Instead, they pursue what gets labeled Coast FIRE or Barista FIRE, saving intensively during their highest earning years before switching to part-time work, often specifically for healthcare benefits, while their investment portfolios continue growing in the background. That brings up the other major piece nobody warns you about up front. Healthcare becomes a massive expense when you retire before age 65 because Medicare eligibility doesn't kick in until then. You're forced to purchase private health insurance, and for a family of 4, that expense can hit $30,000 to $35,000 annually just for coverage alone, a staggering chunk of money that has to come from somewhere in your budget. The math that changes everything. Let me walk through what a decade actually looks like in practice, because this is where the fantasy starts falling apart. Starting from a reasonable position, you've already accumulated $50,000 in savings, your household brings in $150,000 annually, your yearly expenses total $50,000, and you're targeting $1.25 million, which would allow withdrawing $50,000 per year following that 4% rule. Years 1 through 3 look like this. You're banking $100,000 every year while living on $50,000, and between your contributions plus investment returns averaging maybe 7 to 8%, you reach approximately $350,000 after 36 months. During years 4 through 7, let's assume you managed boosting your income to $175,000 through strategic job changes, promotions, or side income, while holding expenses flat at $50,000. Now you're saving $125,000 annually, and by year 7, your portfolio sits around $900,000. Years 8 through 10 represent the final push, where you keep grinding away at the same pace until hitting your target of $1.25 million. Success achieved, except here's what that decade actually demanded from you: 10 straight years of saying no to nearly everything. Driving the same vehicle the entire time, skipping the nicer apartment or the house in the neighborhood you actually wanted, avoiding expensive vacations, rarely eating at restaurants. Every dollar that came in passed through a mental filter asking whether this expense was worth delaying retirement. That entire scenario also assumed absolutely nothing went sideways. No major market crashes wiping out your portfolio value, no medical emergencies draining your savings, no surprise pregnancies changing your financial picture, no aging parents requiring financial support, no unexpected layoffs, no career changes, no burnout forcing you to step back. Perfect conditions and flawless execution for an entire decade, the part that keeps me up at night. Even after doing everything correctly and hitting your target number, something called sequence of returns risk still lurks in the shadows waiting to destroy everything you built. Here's how this risk actually works. Imagine you retire with $1.25 million, and during your first year of retirement, the market plunges 37% like it did in 2008. Your portfolio value drops to roughly $790,000 overnight, but you still need to withdraw $50,000 to cover living expenses because your bills don't pause just because the market crashed. Now you're pulling money from a significantly smaller base, which means when markets eventually recover, you have substantially less capital growing, and if markets stay depressed for several years, which happens more often than people expect, you could spiral into a situation where your portfolio never fully recovers its value. Timing becomes absolutely critical in this equation. Retiring immediately before a major downturn means even perfect execution over 10 years could leave you in serious financial trouble, and nobody can reliably predict when these market crashes will hit. Inflation presents another layer of risk we all just experienced firsthand. Back in 2022, inflation spiked to 9.1%, the highest level since 1981, and everything got dramatically more expensive in a hurry. Your $50,000 annual budget suddenly needs to stretch to $55,000 just to maintain the same lifestyle, but your portfolio might not have grown enough to support that increase, especially if market declines happened at the same time. That 4% rule emerged from historical data spanning 1926 to 1995, and plenty of financial planners now question whether it still holds up because current market valuations sit higher than historical averages. Interest rates have behaved strangely for years, and we're seeing increased volatility across the board. What it actually costs you.
The part that doesn't get discussed nearly enough centers on what you sacrifice during those 10 years, not just the money you avoid spending, but the experiences you miss entirely. Those years of intense saving mode typically fall during your 30s and 40s, the exact period when your friends are getting married, having children, traveling to new places, exploring different hobbies, building careers in directions that might not maximize income, but bring genuine satisfaction and fulfillment. You're choosing to opt out of big portions of that life experience, and maybe the freedom waiting on the other side justifies a decade of extreme discipline and sacrifice. That's a real trade-off, though, and people need to enter this path fully understanding what they're actually giving up. Identity represents another dimension that rarely gets examined seriously. Most people's sense of self connects deeply to what they do professionally. Retiring at 35 or 40 while everyone in your social circle continues working full-time creates a strange void, and research shows that boredom, loss of purpose, and social isolation become genuine problems for early retirees. Some people end up returning to work not because they need the income, but because they need the structure and social connection that employment provides.
The versions nobody talks about. Other approaches exist for thinking about this concept that aren't quite so extreme in their demands. Some people pursue lean fire, where they retire on $25,000 to $35,000 annually. That's absolutely bare-bones living, but moving somewhere with genuinely low costs or embracing extreme frugality as a lifestyle makes it achievable for certain people. Others chase fat fire, which flips the concept entirely. They want retirement spending of $100,000 or more per year. Achieving that requires massive portfolios, often reaching several million dollars, which means either substantially longer timelines or starting from a position of considerable existing wealth. Between those extremes sits what I think makes more sense for most people, something called coast fire, where you save aggressively for perhaps 5 to 10 years while you're young, accumulate enough in investment accounts that compound growth handles the heavy lifting going forward, then you ease off the intensity. You take a lower stress job, shift to part-time hours, pursue something you genuinely enjoy even if the compensation is modest, and you're not fully retired, but you're also not trapped in the traditional grind. That approach feels more sustainable to me, more aligned with how humans actually function over long periods. The privilege we don't name. Circling back to something because it matters deeply, the 10-year retirement plan in its purest form isn't accessible to most people, and that's not because most people lack discipline or don't want it intensely enough. The math requires a specific constellation of circumstances that most people simply don't possess. High income becomes non-negotiable, low or non-existent debt is required, not supporting children or aging parents financially opens up possibilities, living somewhere affordable or willingness to relocate matters enormously, staying healthy throughout the period is assumed, job security can't be taken for granted, and having a partner fully committed to the plan makes a massive difference if you're not single. According to the Federal Reserve's 2022 Survey of Consumer Finances, median retirement savings for Americans between 55 and 64 sits at $185,000. Roughly 25 to 30% of working-age Americans have absolutely nothing saved for retirement at all. Average 401k balances across all age groups hover around $112,000. When we talk about retiring in 10 years with over $1 million accumulated, we're describing something completely unreachable for the vast majority of people. We need honesty about that reality, because without it, this just becomes another metric for people to feel inadequate about. What you can actually do. Even if the full 10-year plan sits completely outside your reality, the underlying principles still carry real value. Calculating exactly how much you actually need for retirement changes how you think about your financial future. Understanding that every dollar saved today is a dollar you won't need to earn later shifts your entire mindset around money. Learning to invest in low-cost index funds rather than leaving everything sitting in savings accounts earning minimal interest makes a tangible difference over time. You might not retire in 10 years, you might not retire in 20 years, but you can still move steadily in that direction. You can still define what financial independence would look like in your specific situation, even if early retirement isn't part of that picture. Maybe your version means having enough saved that taking a year off between jobs doesn't trigger panic. Maybe it means possessing enough cushion that saying no to a toxic work environment becomes possible because you'll survive while finding something better. Maybe it looks like working part-time through your 50s rather than grinding full-time hours into your 60s. Financial independence doesn't have to be an all-or-nothing proposition. Someone earning enough to save 65% of their income who wants to embrace that lifestyle can probably retire in a decade, but someone making $70,000 a year who manages saving 20 or 30% is still building something powerful and meaningful. The real question isn't whether you can retire in 10 years specifically. The real question becomes, what does freedom look like for you personally, and what are you genuinely willing to do to get there? The honest answer: can you really retire in 10 years? Mathematically, yes, the numbers work, and people have successfully done it. Pulling it off requires a level of income, discipline, and fortunate circumstances that most people don't have access to, though. And even for those who do have access, serious thought needs to go into whether you actually want to live that way. Retirement isn't just about hitting the numbers. The whole thing is about what you're retiring from and what you're retiring toward, whether you're running away from something or running towards something you genuinely want. Being miserable for 10 years to never work again might mean you just traded one form of unhappiness for another. A better approach for most people involves thinking about this as a spectrum rather than a binary outcome. On one end sits complete paycheck dependence with hand-to-mouth living, no savings, no options whatsoever. On the other end, you possess enough invested capital that working becomes permanently optional, and most people will land somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, and that's completely acceptable. The goal isn't hitting some arbitrary number in an arbitrary time frame. The goal is gradually building more freedom, expanding your options, creating more breathing room in your financial life. Making choices from a place of opportunity rather than desperation changes everything. Maybe reaching that takes 10 years for you, maybe it takes 30 years. Maybe you discover you actually enjoy working and just want the security of knowing you could walk away if circumstances demanded it. What matters is moving in the direction you want to go at a pace that doesn't break you in the process. People who successfully retire early aren't just skilled at saving money, they're skilled at knowing what they actually want from life. They're honest with themselves about what they value and what they're willing to sacrifice to get it, and they don't pursue this path because the internet told them to. They do it because the approach aligns with something deeper in their core values. If that's not you, if the 10-year plan doesn't align with what you actually want from your life, that's completely acceptable and valid. You don't owe anyone early retirement, you don't owe anyone extreme frugality, you don't have to optimize every dollar and every decision to some theoretical maximum. You just have to be intentional about your choices, know what you're working toward and why it matters to you personally, and be comfortable with the fact that your path will look different from someone else's path. The 10-year retirement plan is real and achievable under the right conditions, but it's not the only path towards a better life, and for most people it's not even the best path available. It's just one option among many possibilities, and knowing that, understanding the full picture with all its trade-offs and requirements, gives you the power to choose what's actually right for your unique situation. Take what's useful from this information, leave what doesn't serve you, build something that makes sense for your life, your income level, your values, your timeline. Remember that progress, even slow progress, is still progress worth celebrating. You don't have to accomplish this in 10 years, you just have to start moving.